Welcome back, everybody, to our amazing 50-hour epic online vigil in solidarity with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. My name is Susie Dawson. I'm the president of the Internet Party of New Zealand. I'm a journalist and I'm an activist. Thank you so much for being here with us. I'm now going to have the distinguished honour of speaking to someone who I've wanted to meet, so to speak, online for a very long time now. His name is Brian Becker. He, along with John Kiriakou, who you've seen on this and several of our Vigil streams prior, they host together Loud and Clear Radio on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C. Brian Becker is also the National Director of the Answer Coalition, which is an organization responsible for some of the largest on-the-ground manifestations against war and racism in the United States. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Great pleasure, thanks.
Brian, thank you so much for being here to speak for Julian Assange. I was hoping you could give us some background into what are the personal impacts on you and your work of some of the revelations and releases made by WikiLeaks over the years.
Well, I would start with the Iraq war logs. I was doing, and still am doing, anti-war organizing in the United States, not just among the general population, but also among U.S. soldiers, Marines, and sailors, those who are sent to kill and be killed in these endless wars. And I would have to say, having met some of the people who were in that videotape that WikiLeaks released, that the Pentagon had, that Reuters was trying to get through public records requests, but unsuccessfully, the Iraq war logs that show this American Air Force pilot in an Apache attack helicopter gunning down journalists and civilians, including children, and sort of, getting like high fives on the intercom from his superiors and laughing about it. That log, which is so damning and so revealing, the Pentagon didn't want us to see it. They didn't want the people to see it. They didn't want the world to see it because it exposed that the United States presence in Iraq was not simply a mistake. It was criminal. It was a crime against humanity. It was a war crime. And WikiLeaks exposed this. Now, are we to punish those who expose criminal conduct? Are we to punish those who expose war crimes? Are we to punish those who expose crimes against humanity? Or are we to lift them up and say thank you and punish those who are responsible for the crimes? And here we have it. That not only are the criminals who conducted that criminal war in all of its different manifestations, not only are they walking free, they're going around the country and the world selling books and getting $50,000 fees to speak. And those who expose the crimes, Julian Assange in particular and WikiLeaks in particular, are the subject of what the UN calls arbitrary detention, hold up in solitary confinement since 2012. And the most damning thing, I think, well, I don't know if it's the most damning. There are so many different things to damn here. But certainly one of the most damning things is that the same media, the same CNN or New York Times or Washington Post that was glad to publish all the stories about the Iraq war logs and the revelations for those videos and so many other documents that WikiLeaks released to the public, they covered them. They use them as news. They made money from them, but they won't lift a finger or raise their voice in defense of Julian Assange right now. And that too, I find to be particularly damning.
Well, you say, are we to punish those who bring us this information, the whistleblowers? And in the case of Chelsea Manning, absolutely they were punished. Given the types, the actual torture that Chelsea Manning was subjected to, what kind of handling would you expect from the United States were they to successfully extradite Julian Assange?
Well, one, they will want to put Julian Assange in prison the rest of his life. They will want to put him in a supermax prison so that they can carry out all kinds of sensory deprivation, which is what they do to supermax prisoners in America, the political prisoners, and there's a great number of them. to deny him communications with the outside world, to stop him from continuing to do his work, and ultimately to break him as a person. And perhaps, and we know this from the record, not simply from speculation, a great number of politicians in America want to execute Julian Assange. They want him to be put to death. They've said so. They've said so in public speeches. They've said so in the mass media. So what the US has in mind for Julian Assange, if they can get their hands on him, is not only to harm him and punish him and imprison him and perhaps kill him. They want to make an example out of him because they don't want this to be happening. They don't want whistleblowers inspired by what WikiLeaks has done or what others have done, like Chelsea. They don't want them to come forward. How do you prevent the whistleblowers, the truth tellers, from coming forward? They borrow the same tactics that were used in the Inquisition back in the 15th century, to make an example out of people. Back then, it was burning them at the stake. There are other methods now, but perhaps of the same level of barbarism.
Right, which is why we see journalists and whistleblowers in exile or in prison, or in the Ecuadorian Embassy in London being arbitrarily detained.
Indeed. I mean, I think the reason this vigil is important, the reason this vigil is critically important, is that absent any sort of outcry from the mainstream media, which, as I said, has been glad to utilize WikiLeaks' work, aside from and absent from their using their megaphone, and it's quite loud, we have to do this. We, the people, have to do this. This has to come from the grassroots. And, when you look back at history, when it looks like all of these David and Goliath fights throughout history, those who are the underdogs prevail only because they have appealed to and get the support from the grassroots. And so anybody who actually cares about press freedom, individual freedom, or the truth needs to take action right now. I mean, this is an urgent matter. This is not something where, I have a checklist and there's 50 things to do today, and maybe I'll get on point number 45 to doing something to support Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. This has to be front and center.
Right. So I couldn't agree with you more, because WikiLeaks has acted as like a bulwark against attacks on it's provided a space for independent media in particular to operate in that we may not otherwise have had. And when I interviewed Daniel Ellsberg on this Vigil series, he said that he believes the US is looking to set a legal precedent by which they can then go after, or at least threaten, other journalists, and publishers in the wake of any successful prosecution of Julian Assange. Do you believe that that is the case, that there is a larger strategy here to oppress the media or suppress the media, and particularly in the United States, but perhaps worldwide?
Yeah, Daniel Ellsberg is right, and he knows. I mean, he, of course, was the target of prosecution because he dared to tell the truth to the American people about the lies the government that spoke in their name and spent their money and sent their sons and daughters into harm's way. He told the truth to them about the lies from the same government, and the government wanted to get him. They wanted to get him badly. And, I think he's right. They want to make an example out of Julian. They want to be able to treat him very, very badly, harshly, again, imprisoned for life or worse. And the reason for it, and Ellsberg also knows this, is that throughout the entire machinery of government, throughout the machinery of the state, there are millions of people who know truth that is not being told. There are people who actually know where the bodies are buried, so to speak. They know about the skeletons in the closet. They know that we need to know important information. And they have the capacity as human beings with brains and with the mouth to speak and the ability to write and to communicate. They have the ability to expose these truths. And there's nothing more frightening to the government than for the people to learn the truth about what the machinations of the state and the bureaucracy, especially the intelligence agencies and the war machine are doing. You know, we have this old cliche that the first casualty in war is the truth. Well, the fact of the matter is the first casualty being truth is also true in peacetime, because we're in a situation where governments are, or certainly the US government and the government in the UK, are constantly engaged in preparation for war. They're constantly engaged in carrying out what I consider to be flagrantly, at least in America, unconstitutional surveillance of the American people. They have erected a surveillance state. There are many people like Julian Assange or Edward Snowden or others who are part of that machinery who could come forward and expose these truths. Now, why is that important? It's not important simply because the American people or the people of the world or the people of the UK are interested in the truth. The reason it's dangerous is if the people know the truth, the people might start to act. And it's when people start to act, when they start to participate, when they become actors on the political stage, that the powers that be get really scared. If you look through history, even historical examples of modern times, how did the war in Vietnam finally end? You know, how did the civil rights movement come to succeed at all in the United States? You can go through all of the progressive social developments that have happened. It's because people, average people, the people who aren't normally consulted, aren't part of the inner circle, aren't part of the sort of political class, they become political actors. And the thing that motivates them is, one, they know they've learned the truth, and two, they believe that in their action, they can make a difference. If they have hope that they can make a difference, they act. And when they act, they can change the political climate and the political calculus. So, you know, the ruling classes of the world, they know this. They know that the truth is powerful. They know the truth is powerful because it becomes a weapon in the hands of grassroots people's movements. And that's the real reason they want to suppress the truth. It's not because the system automatically collapses. It's not because their agents will die in the field. It's not because a war plan has been revealed. It's because it empowers people. And that's what they're afraid of.
That is a fantastic piece of wisdom there, and I believe you're spot on. Now, I'm particularly interested in your organizing experience, because this movement started off as a series of online vigils for Julian that have steadily grown. We did a 10-hour vigil, then a 26-hour, then a 38, and now this is 50 hours. We did that consciously. We've been expanding it, visibly expanding it, because we want to show people that there is an ever-growing number of people willing to stand up in public and say, yes, I support Julian, and what's happening to him is wrong, and it's important that we all support him. However, I thought, God, I can't believe it's only been 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, Kim.com, myself, Ray McGovern, Elizabeth Levos, Editor-in-Chief of Disobedient Media, and Vivian Kubrick launched a new organising platform, and we opened it up to the public. And that was somewhere that people could donate their time, their resources, their professional experience and skill set, and work on a set of teams and collaborate with other supporters of Julian to support actions on the ground around the world and engage in other types of activities in support of Julian and WikiLeaks. We were hoping for 500 people. We were amazed when we hit 1,000 volunteers within just the one stream. And within 4 days, we had 2,600 volunteers working actively with each other to build this movement and build this campaign. What I would like to know from you is, how do we take this incredible amount of human resource that we now have and go from 2,600 to 25,000 and 25,000 to 2 million? And how do we go from an online organizing platform to the big events on the ground? Because it's really clear that what we are engaged in information activism in terms of what we're circulating online and the messaging and getting information to people, but to truly pressure the governments, we're going to have to take it to the streets. So I'd really like to hear some wisdom from you about that process.
Sure, I'd be glad to share our own experience, but just can I ask, how do people find that, the organization you've created?
It's at our website. It's unity4j.com/discord. if you put I mean, you can just check out our site and there's another link to it, but the /Discord will put you onto the organizing platform. And on the platform, we have separated by skill sets. We have a communications team, research and outreach. We have a translation team who've been translating content into 26 languages. We have a video production team, a graphic design team, a web team, a stream team supporting streams like this, a podcast team doing podcasts. We've got the whole 9 yards, and it's come together with $0. We haven't even asked for donations because we are running purely on people power and on people's goodwill and their willingness to volunteer their services and their time. And yeah, that's where we've got to after 2 weeks. So we're not looking now at the next month, at the next 6 months, at the next year, where do we want to go? Because I feel like this is overdue. Julian Assange called this she said this is timely. This is coming together at exactly the right time when Julian most critically needs it. But it's been 8 years, since Julian was first on the Pentagon manhunt list. And we feel it's long overdue for there to be thousands of people on the streets protecting Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. So I think someone like you, and also Don DeBar, who I talked to yesterday, had fantastic community organizing experience and was giving me tons of great ideas about what we should do next and how we should go about it. But I think you in particular, because you've worked in movements at that scale, at the scale of millions, I would really love to hear from you. What are your ideas for some blueprints for getting from 2,600 people online to 2 million on the ground?
Yeah, it's the key question. It's always the key question: what to do, how to do it, how to engage people, how to give them a way in, so that they can participate. And there's a lot of different levels to it. But I want to just to begin, congratulate you. I mean, that's an amazing achievement. I hope people watching this actually go online and sign up and join you. And make their skill set known to you and how to be in touch with you. I think it's so impressive. I mean, that the 2,600 people who have joined up. So that's the first step. I think there are different elements of it. And when you look at mass organizing, you need to have a tight message, a clear message of what you're fighting for, so that it's easily graspable and easily communicated. Secondly, I think that there has to be concrete resources provided for a movement which inherently, fundamentally will be in some ways decentralized, but needs some centralizing anchors. For instance, so many people know about WikiLeaks and so many people know about Julian Assange that it's very possible that people on their own will be able to engage in practical activity. What they need, perhaps, is materials that are developed as PDFs online that they can easily print. Placards, signs, talking points, a flyer, things that they can actually print out or with their church or their synagogue or their wherever they are, wherever their religious institution or their union or their community group or their student organization, they can print this stuff out, they can circulate it among people, they can organize a discussion. I mean, people themselves can be the messengers within their communities where they really are, not simply online, but they need resources. Without those practical materials, a placard. Right now, we're doing something. I'm here in New Mexico. I live in Washington, D.C., as you mentioned, and I do the show every day with John Kiriakou, Loud and Clear, which is a 2 hours a day radio show. But I'm here in New Mexico, and we're meeting with all of these young people, and we had a conference yesterday, and I'm going after I finish this to meet with them the rest of the day. And what they're doing is they're going all over New Mexico, because New Mexico has been picked by the nuclear industry and by the government to become the parking lot for nuclear waste from all over the United States. It will be shipped to New Mexico and dumped here because the powers that be figure, well, the state is too poor, the people can't really focus on big picture politics. The military-industrial complex has already got a foothold here. So people are fighting back. They want to stop this. They want to do things. So what we're doing is we provided a simple poster, talking points, a leaflet that they can hand out and that they can print. And then what we're going to do is have a coordinated day of activities so New Mexicans all over the state can act together. That's important because let's say you're in a small town and you're doing something for Julian right now or for WikiLeaks. And you say, gosh, I'm only going to get 10 of my friends to come out. We're going to go in front of City Hall. We'll have 10 people or maybe 30 people or 40 people. If they know that something else is also happening in 500 other cities, when they go and speak to the media in their small town, they can say, yes, we may be small in number here, but we represent the sentiments and the feelings and the desires of many people who would be with us, but they're working, or many people who would be with us, but they have to take their kids to school. And not only that, at this very moment, in cities all over this country and in cities and towns all over the world, we are standing together for Julian Assange and standing together for WikiLeaks. That empowers people who don't feel empowered because maybe they're encountering the problem of smallness, the problem of apathy within their town or within their school. It empowers them. It makes them feel like however small it might be here, it's big. And I think that's important. That again, going back to this fundamental concept, when do people act? They act when they feel that they can possibly make a difference. In the run-up to the Iraq War, we had a very simple slogan: "Stop the war before it starts." And in October 2002, I'll just tangentially break off here and just describe the story, but I think it has usefulness in terms of what needs to happen for WikiLeaks and for Julian's case. We started off, we could see that Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld were preparing to go to war in Iraq. We realized that fully by the end of August 2002. We talked among all of our friends in the liberal progressive movement and said, let's go to the streets, let's have a demonstration. And our friends said, oh no, that's going to be a waste of time. People don't care about demonstrations. That's 1960s stuff. And they said, instead we'll lobby Congress. And we said, that's a dead end. If you think Congress is going to do anything, you're kidding yourself. Even though the Congress people were getting calls 300-1 against going to war in Iraq. So we called the demonstration for October 26, 2002, and 100,000 people came out. And that ignited an anti-war movement, both in the United States and in fact around the world, because people felt what they were doing could possibly make a difference. Stop the war before it starts. A very, very simple slogan. So I think that one of the things that we need to do is have coordinated anchoring events with a simple slogan to tell people what they do now can make a difference in terms of impacting the outcome for Julian Assange. If it wasn't for public opinion already, Julian Assange, I believe, would have been turned over to the authorities in the UK and probably extradited. It's only people's opposition to this happening that has prevented it from happening so far. If the government in Ecuador is a different government, which of course we know it is, if it's more prone to being pressured and pushed by other more powerful entities, then we have to step it up. We have to increase the power, the pressure, the impact that people have, because again, that's the only thing that's preventing this catastrophe from taking place. So I would say providing online resources that are printable for local groups, having some coordinated days of practical activity, say on a particular day where people all around the world can do something together, and have a simple slogan so that people know when they go out and talk about this, they know exactly what they're demanding. And of course, what they're demanding is very simple. We're demanding the freedom of Julian Assange. We're demanding that he be able to return to his family, that he is, according to the United Nations, which is, the United States is a signer to the Charter of the United Nations. The United Nations has ruled that he is the victim of arbitrary detention, and as a consequence, he must be freed. These kind of simple, short talking points with a simple slogan and a demand and an anchoring activity for coordinated activities from self-acting people, I think that would be like an important next step. Anyway, these are complicated issues about how to build a movement. So I'm just suggesting based on my own experience.
Well, I have your email address now.
And we, by the way, would be glad to promote your site and the efforts for people to volunteer. Answer Coalition, we have chapters in about 30 cities around the United States. We've been doing this work. We started September 14th, 2001, 3 days after September 11th. When Americans were gathering, New Yorkers were gathering, I was living not far from the Twin Towers at the time. People were starting to assemble, progressive people starting to assemble at Union Square in Lower Manhattan. And we didn't, nobody knew exactly what to do. It was such a major event, the attacks on September 11th. People started chanting, "War is not the answer, war is not the answer." On September 14th, 2001, we said, we took that chant and developed an acronym, Act Now to Stop War and End Racism. And we called the demonstration on September 29th, 2001 to say, war is not the answer. And 25,000 people came out, which was remarkable. Nobody thought anybody would come out because the level of the atmosphere, political atmosphere in the United States was so awful at the time, where Bush was able to cynically manipulate people's rage and grief and turn it into a war fever. And yet people did come, at least some people, 25,000. And that got the ball rolling, really. And that's what we need. We need people to feel some momentum.
I was actually in the States, but before and shortly after 9/11, so I know from firsthand experience exactly what that atmosphere was like. And it's incredible that within 18 days of the event that you could achieve something like that, truly incredible in the atmosphere. So we're in a situation now in terms of the general public and the media and the political sphere, but also the activists, because it has really had a great impact on the activists, where there is this intense divide and conquer as this residue from the outcome of the 2016 election. So the premise that we went with for building this movement, our slogan here is that in a world of divide and conquer, unity is the ultimate act of resistance. So what we've said from day one is we don't care if you voted for Trump. We don't care if you voted for Clinton. We don't care if you didn't vote for either of them. We don't care what your political affiliation or ideology is. If you support Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and you believe Julian should be freed, you are welcome and have a home here in this movement. And we have consciously sought out public speakers and voices from across the entire political spectrum and invited them onto this platform, not to talk about their political ideology, but to talk about freeing Julian Assange and the importance of this and the significance of WikiLeaks, of press freedom, and of human rights. And that seems to have opened the floodgates to all of these people. I've had message after message in the last 2 weeks saying to me, I was waiting for something like this. I was just waiting for something like this, something that isn't partisan, something that isn't exclusive to one ideology, but which is inclusive of everybody who just cares about this single issue. And I firmly believe that if we continue building, that we can, if we haven't already, we can have a very significant impact on Julian's situation. I've also been extensively studying the Free Mandela movement, because New Zealand, my country where I come from, was heavily involved in anti-apartheid and in the Free Mandela movement, amongst other issues, also anti-war and anti-nuclear activism. So as the next generation of activists down from that in New Zealand, I worked with and studied with activists who were involved in those movements. And so we're trying to model ourselves here off similar principles to the Free Mandela movement, because like Julian, Mandela was called a tool of the Kremlin, a tool of Russia. Was the same type of smears were used 30 years ago against Mandela that we see being used against Julian now. and Mandela was a political prisoner, and Julian is a political prisoner. So while there are a lot of differences between Mandela and Assange, obviously, there are some similarities, and particularly in relation to movement building. Do you think I'm onto something there? Like, can this be this generation's Free Mandela movement?
Well, I would say this, that the point that I think is the point of unity, in addition to just the justice of winning freedom for Julian, is the understanding that what the government is trying to essentially do is suppress people's right to know the truth and to exercise free speech vis-a-vis alternative media sources. And when we look at, as you've alluded to correctly, after the 2016 election in America, here where I am, the so-called Russiagate thing is really an attack. It's degenerated or devolved into what is in essence an attack on alternative voices. So if WikiLeaks tells the truth or releases documents that expose that the Democratic National Committee violated its own rules and tried to skew the primary so that Bernie Sanders, a candidate who had the support of 80% of young people in America, could not win. If WikiLeaks did that, WikiLeaks was doing it on behalf of Russia. If you're a Black Lives Matter activist and you're out in the streets and you're protesting racist police violence, you may not be a witting stooge of the Kremlin. You are an unwitting stooge of the Kremlin because your fight against racism and for justice in America is congruent with the Kremlin's agenda. If you're for peace, like my organization, and Russia is also announces that it's for peace, we become either the witting or unwitting stooges of the Kremlin. If alternative media starts to broadcast a message that Dan Coates, the director of national intelligence, 3 days ago said Russia is involved in a pervasive messaging campaign. Well, what does that actually mean? It means all of our messages are now tainted with the broad brush that we are the agents, witting or unwitting, of a hostile state actor. And so it discredits the alternative media. It's also being used to shut down alternative media. My radio show, the one I do with John Kiriakou, has been shut down now in different cities because people are saying, oh, because it's on Sputnik, that will, if not become the voice of Kremlin propaganda in our city, it will endanger us to host a show that's connected in any way with Sputnik. So just recently, a couple of weeks ago, the show was very popular in Austin, Texas, a liberal city in Texas. It's shut down now. I mean, this is the dominant atmosphere right now. Julian's case, in a way, is the tip of the spear for what amounts to be a full-scale attack on alternative media and the right to express and learn views that are contrary to the dominant mainstream narrative. So when you talk about unity, whether you're from a conservative or from the left, and of course I'm from the left, it would seem to me that it has an appeal to everyone who believes that people have the right to learn, the right to know, the right to communicate, the right to access alternative media. That is the point right here. And if the government, and I'm talking about the government machine, you know, because the politicians come and go every 2 or 4 years. There's another crop of well-heeled politicians who are, you know, being lobbied by corporate America or by the military-industrial complex or the surveillance state complex. They come and go, but this professional state machinery is trying to shut down alternative voices. And sadly, I would say, because of the way the case has been presented in the public, there are even progressive people who are now joining in with this kind of hysteria. People who, like 5 years ago, would have said, oh, WikiLeaks is great. What Julian has done is so important. But under the atmosphere of this campaign post-2016 election in America, even some of them have backed away. because the government is tainting everybody as a Russian stooge. WikiLeaks is not a stooge of Russia. WikiLeaks existed before this hysteria began. WikiLeaks was telling the truth for a long time. Let's all remember, I'm speaking now to liberal people who might have been impacted by this hysteria, who are, you know, as I am, opponents of Donald Trump. Think back to how you felt about WikiLeaks in 2007 and 2008. Think about how we all relied on it. Think about how we were able to make arguments with our friends or in our workplace or in our union or in our religious institution, how we took the documents that WikiLeaks made available and used them really as the core argument. Remember how much WikiLeaks meant to all of us. And I think, of course, I'm speaking again now to people on the left side of the aisle, because they need to remember and embrace the truth that WikiLeaks has been by itself. And you can look at WikiLeaks and Julian's own record. There's no way you can ideologically pigeonhole WikiLeaks or Julian Assange. I mean, he's been exposing the abuse of power. He's been exposing government lies. He's been a truth teller. It has not really been ideological. And as a consequence, I think there is a very strong potential to build the kind of unity that you are discussing, and which I believe is imperative right now.
Thank you so much for saying so, because it is quite a courageous stance at this point in time, when people have been so conditioned into believing that they must break social ties with anyone who doesn't think like they do, that they must exclude anyone who isn't in their tribe, so to speak. It actually takes a bit of bravery to say, hey, you know what? It's actually okay to work with people who don't agree with us on different issues if we agree on this one issue, and if together we can have a more significant impact on that issue, you know, rather than trying to go at it independently. And I feel like activism has remained niche for so long because it has been inherently tied to ideology, or where it has been inherently tied to ideology is a better way to put it. It has remained more niche, whereas if we want millions in the street, if we want to unite large numbers of people, we're going to have that more open attitude. And that's actually something I learned from Occupy, because at Occupy in New Zealand, we had every kind of ideology you could imagine represented there, and that was acceptable because we were the 99%, and the 99% was comprised of all of these different diverse positions and voices and experiences. I want to take this back to the intelligence agencies for a minute, because it's pretty clear that they are the ones who are the most dead set against Julian's activities and WikiLeaks activities. We know from FOIA requests in the United States that fusion centers, which are the localized state information hubs through which the intelligence passes through, we know that they've been involved in targeting both left-wing activists and right-wing activists simultaneously. For example, there were records that showed that they had been spying on both pro-life and pro-choice activism groups, infiltrating them, subverting them, which shows me that maybe those agencies are actually non-partisan, because it seems that they are, the only thing they're truly afraid of isn't the left or the right, but they're afraid of change to their status quo, anything that might represent the threat of change. And WikiLeaks does threaten change, because WikiLeaks has been a model of journalism which has resulted in change. Do you agree with me?
I do, and I can say from our own history. Well, let's start with this. Let's start, since you mentioned Occupy. The Partnership for Civil Justice Fund, and Mara Verheyden-Hilliard is the executive director. And I would urge you for the next Vigil, online Vigil, to contact her, because their work is so amazing. But through Freedom of Information Act requests, public records requests, they were able to get all of the documents from the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI and local mayors and local police departments about what the FBI using and the other intelligence agencies using the fusion centers did to Occupy. They surveilled every piece of Occupy in every town and in every city. I read all of the documents.
And sorry to interrupt, but in every country. in
And in
every country. It was, yes, this was international. But you're correct. You're talking
so
about the
they acknowledge in these documents, this is a peaceful movement. It's a political movement. It's not a terrorist movement, right? They say all that, but they use the fusion centers, which are these gargantuan Orwellian machines that partner FBI, local law enforcement, corporate America. They fuse them all together to carry out this massive surveillance using anti-terrorism authority and anti-terrorism budgeting to surveil against the Occupy movement. Now, that says so much. Eventually, the Occupy movement had in America had 7,000 arrests and was shut down within a matter of months using all kinds of different pretexts, public safety, this, that, or the other thing. But we could see in the documents, this was a coordinated attack by the government. Now, if you believe that's wrong, if you believe that the government is misusing and abusing its anti-terrorism authority, if the intelligence agencies are attacking peaceful protesters, exercising what in America is considered a cherished right, the right to assemble peacefully, to redress grievances, to say that you don't agree to the government, if the same government intelligence agencies are using those authorities and that budgeting, our money, to attack that kind of a movement, then you have to say those people are the enemies of freedom. And if they're the ones who are trying to shut down WikiLeaks, if they're the ones who are trying to demonize Julian Assange and to try to convince the public that Julian Assange is nothing other than the stooge or the agent of a foreign enemy actor, in this case Russia, if you think about it, then you have to reject the fundamental notion of their presentation. Their record speaks for itself. In our case, in the Answer Coalition, after September 11th, when we started, we were infiltrated. We forced the government in a court case to explain, to reveal the identities of the undercover agents who had infiltrated us. No, we were a peaceful movement. The government law enforcement came and said to the judge, "Oh, we can't tell them who the infiltrators were because we would kill them, that we would actually go and assassinate these people." And the judge said, "No, they have the right to see." So we went down to the police station in Washington, D.C., accompanied by other undercover police agents, and were able to see the individuals who we suspected were undercover agents of the FBI or other police law enforcement. And in fact, we saw them and they were the people. Now, is that correct? Is that right? If we get together and exercise our First Amendment right to assemble peacefully and redress grievances, that we have to be targeted by the surveillance state, by intelligence agencies, that they have to report back and keep files and documents on us? I mean, isn't that a fundamental threat to all people who actually want to exercise free speech rights? So that's what's at stake here. That's what's at stake. It's Julian Assange versus the same intelligence communities that are a threat to everyone's personal freedom, our right to speak, and also our right to privacy.
That is just so well put. And I sat here smiling away to myself, not because any of this amuses me. It actually affected me very personally and very deeply, and almost everybody else that I knew in the activism sphere in New Zealand. But I was smiling because I know precisely the FOIA requests you're talking about, precisely the organization that procured them, and precisely the significance of that. Something else that they were able to prove was that the directions came from the Obama White House. The president himself was personally implicated in the suppression of the Occupy movement.
That's right. James Comey, FBI director at the time. And before that, Mueller. Some people are now thinking Robert Mueller, who's trying to, or the FBI, who are supposedly the guardians of our democracy against Donald Trump and against the Russian. These are the same people who rounded up Muslims, who put them in jail, not because of what they did, but because of who they were, and who carried out these illegal operations, surveillance operations, using anti-terrorism authority and budgeting against peaceful protesters. Those people are not the guardians of anyone's democracy.
I completely agree with you, and that's been one of the one of the things I could not quite wrap my head around is how activists whose lives were so negatively affected by the actions of those intelligence agencies under the Obama administration could ever think that embracing those agencies would come to any good whatsoever. That's something that I've not ever been able to understand. So WikiLeaks has published against the Bush administration, against the interests of the Bush administration. It has published against the interests of the Obama administration. Something that very few, if any, people have picked up on, other than myself, who's been trotting it out every now and then, is that they did in fact publish against the Trump administration, but the media didn't pick up on it, and neither has anybody else. And I say that because in the DC leaks, it had all of the Trump opposition research of the Clinton campaign. And so I went through and actually read those files, and I opened the spreadsheets. And inside the spreadsheets is all of the super PAC donation information, names, foundations, dollar amounts, dates, everything for the donors to the Trump campaign. So while the DC leaks are being postured as being purely to the disadvantage of the Clinton campaign, anybody who cared enough to do the research and actually look at what was published would have very soon found themselves able to form a significant profile of Donald Trump's money flows and his campaign ties.
Yeah, that's really important, and I think people don't know that. Again, it's all completely skewed. People don't do the research; they bounce off the headlines. The headlines are designed to create bias and prejudice and to misinform the public about what's actually happening. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, and there's just so much else to the story. You know, the Clinton campaign hired Christopher Steele, a British foreign agent, to go talk to Russians and pay them money to gather information against Donald Trump. I mean, that's collusion with a foreign intelligence agent working with Russians. I mean, Trump did awful things. Clinton did awful things. We cannot be partisan here. We cannot be like, oh, I'm in the Democratic camp, or I'm simply in the Republican camp, or I'm in any political camp. The machinations of American politics is dripping with corruption and abuse. It's actually the negation of democracy in many ways. But unfortunately, because again, this kind of non-thinking animus against Trump, I mean, the animus is justified from my point of view, but it's not enough to say to ourselves, oh, we want to bring down Donald Trump, so we're going to unite with the FBI, we're going to unite with law enforcement, we're going to unite with the surveillance state, we're only going to tell part of the story, and we're going to embrace the attack and the assault on independent journalists, alternative media voices, just to get rid of Donald Trump. I mean, okay, I understand you want to get rid of Donald Trump, but is getting rid of free speech, is getting rid of your right to protest, is getting rid of your right to listen to alternative media, is that part of the bargain? Is that necessary? Of course it's not necessary. We should focus on the things that actually matter to people. We must reject this kind of identification with WikiLeaks, an independent media source, as an enemy actor. You know, when the first Cold War started, that's why thousands of people in America went to prison, people who were socialists, for instance, not because they had done something wrong, but they had socialist ideas. They were jailed, or they were driven out of the country. They lost their jobs. You know, a witch hunt is a dangerous thing, and Julian Assange and WikiLeaks is the victim of a witch hunt. And the power of a witch hunt is even people of conscience sometimes think, oh, I want to go along with the witch hunt, or I don't want to speak up against it, because if I do, I too will be a witch. And that's the danger here, this kind of generated, studied hysteria that's designed to criminalize dissent and criminalize independent journalism. That's too heavy of a price to pay for anyone, no matter how you feel politically.
What's become apparent to me is that they have started using us to police each other. And I say that because during the Occupy movement, we would have a mass protest action, and there would be a front line of the action, and on the other side would be the police, and it would be very much the public protesting against the state, very visibly, citizens versus government. But when we fast forward now, 2016, 2017, we see protests where it is citizens versus another group of citizens head to head against each other, and the agents of the state are on the sidelines eating popcorn, you know, either letting them go at it or maybe hauling a couple away. But the pressure has been taken off the state, the pressure has been taken off the government and the government agents, because they have got the citizenry openly combating each other. And that, to me, when I watch these protest streams, you know, because this is part of what I did, I would live tweet protests and work with a live streamer at Occupy. We would be filming citizens against the government. Now I see the same streamers I knew from Occupy covering protests where it's citizen against citizen. And it's such a visual representation of the divide and conquer. And sometimes I'm astonished that not more people can see that has occurred. And I also think that there are enough awake people who understand, and even did in 2016, that Hillary and Trump are both terrible candidates for president. Why are we not having someone who's actually qualified to lead the country? Why have we got a reality TV star and a warmonger? Like, is that really the best that America has to offer up out of 300 million people? Surely not. And I feel like by building this unity movement, we're opening the door to those people to have a way forward where they're not in the citizen versus citizen madness struggle, and they don't have to be in the I love the reality TV star or I love the warmongering pseudo-feminist camps. It's like a third option has opened way, and that's really what we're trying to do here.
Very well spoken, and I totally agree with you. And the other thing is, Bill and Hillary Clinton were good buddies with Donald Trump before 2016. You can see all the old pictures. They were together. I mean, again, why should we be the tail to either kite? You're absolutely right. The real problem, the real danger to democracy is the state itself, is the gargantuan state apparatus that's aggregating power, it's aggregating authority, it's aggregating technological capacity to dominate society and to dominate us. It's so obvious and evident, but again, you know, divide and conquer is a well-tested tactic for divide and rule, and that's what's going on here. And you're right. The way to stop it, the way to defeat it, is to do exactly what you're doing, what we're doing, which is to stand up, tell the truth, tell people that there's another way, the way that you're suggesting, which is, shouldn't we all be uniting around something that is dear to all of us? The right of free speech, the right to assemble, the right to alternative movement, and the right to hear journalism like WikiLeaks, and the right for Julian Assange, first and foremost, to be set free.
There's nothing I can say to top that. You've just absolutely nailed it, Brian. Thank you so much for being here and for showing your support for Julian and for WikiLeaks. Thank you for being one of those voices that's brave enough to go against the grain. And thank you for your offer to support this movement, because that is of vital importance for us to have, particularly for myself, to have someone with more experience than me, with a whole different network and connections than me, who's willing to help to guide us so that we can do this right and we can keep it on track and keep building. So I personally genuinely appreciate that. Thank you so much, and I will be in touch.
Very good, and thanks for the opportunity to let me speak in support of Julian.
Oh, you've been amazing. That was a fantastic segment, and I look forward to watching the playback later on. Thank you so much. That was Brian Becker. Check out Loud and Clear Radio. It's on Sputnik Radio, actually. It's with John Kiriakou, who has been one of the, actually he was with us from our very first vigil in this movement. John Kiriakou is an amazing human being, and so is Brian Becker. So thank you again